Hello and welcome to episode 2 of my podcast. I am DancingGeek online. My real name is James. You can use either, that's fine. And I have a Ravelry group now that I have set up for this podcast. So if you want to find me online, if you want to come over, it's DancingGeek podcast. Original. But yes, I've set that up, and shout out to Knit Sew Crochet who joined whilst I was making the group, so that's an impressive find. So episode 2, I'm doing it again. I have to start with a massive, huge thank you to everybody that has commented or subscribed or liked or shared it or messaged me on Ravelry or on Instagram, or just, oh my god, blown away. I really was not expecting 5 people watching this would have been awesome, and nobody talking about it would have been like, yeah, okay, fine. And you guys have just made me feel so welcome and told me how much you've enjoyed stuff, so that has been really lovely. Thank you. And that's why I'm doing this again, so this is all your fault. I have some FOs and some WIPs, so I'll start with, oh yeah, I'm looking around for my hat. I'm wearing it. Oh dear. Yes, I'm wearing it because I played with my hair a lot last time, and when I watched the Fat Squirrel Speaks, she was like, I'm playing with my hair, I got a new haircut, so she put a hat on, and I thought, well, that's genius. And I've just finished my hat, so ta-da! Thank you very much. Yes. New hat. So I've stuck my hair all up in this hat, so now suddenly you can see my big shiny forehead. So yes, there is my hat now. Let's see, this is Ripples Crafts yarn, and it's the Assynt Storms. Assynt is apparently the region where the dyer lives up in Scotland. And after talking last time in my Stash Love about how I had 2 different versions of Assynt Storms and they look really different, I realised later that it's like it's like a theme. So Assynt Storms is like a theme, and she's got a sock yarn club thing going, I think, for Assynt Storms, and every month you get a different Assynt Storms. So that's why they look completely different. This one is the sock yarn with the nylon in it, because I preferred the colours for my hat. But the other one is actually 100% wool, so I won't make socks out of that one either. So, as well as this, it's not really a faux, but I'm super proud of it. It's kind of a progress from last time, which is, ta-da! I got one of my socks done! Now I've zoomed in quite a bit, I might just zoom out a little bit. Fancy, I can do this. There's actually a remote control, I haven't worked out how to use that, so maybe next time. There we go. I always feel like this is why I did it, because I feel like I have to sit up when I'm in this position. But you can see the whole sock. There we go. On my lovely sock blockers that I got for my birthday. So yum. Loving the colours here. Absolutely gorgeous. So this pattern is Ribbed for His Pleasure. Yes, indeed. By Christopher Dixon, who I did mention in my last podcast. But he got in touch with me afterwards, bless him, and kind of went, why no show notes? Twice. So, Christopher, I am going to put you in today's show notes, and I'm shouting you out again, okay? You're getting all the loves. Yeah, so on Instagram, he is Knits with Balls, or one word. And yeah, if that and the name of the pattern doesn't tell you what he's like, then I don't know what will. But yeah, this is an awesome sock. I'm really happy with it, and it was dead easy to do. I got a little bit confused how long I should make the foot, so I'm doing something a little bit sort of odd. I'm going to make the second sock a little bit longer so I can try them out, because I'm still learning kind of what is a fit that I really like. So I think that's okay. I don't think I'm faffing too much, really. I think I'm still getting a sense for what kind of fit of sock I like. Yes, so rib for his pleasure. Fits really lovely, really easy to do, not tricky to get the size right because it's got lots of ribbing. Really straightforward heel and toe. I'm definitely going to make the second sock. I've already cast it on. And yeah. The yarn is the Jawohl! Degradé yarn. That's my sort of German-French yarn I mentioned last time. And this is in knit up. Okay, I feel like that's enough of me holding the sock in front of the screen now. So, I talked about the fact I've cast it on, but last time I did some historic finished objects because I'm super proud of them. So I've got one more to show you. And this is my baseball jersey that I made. Ta-da! Now I'm fully zoomed out and it's still a little tricky to get it all in shot. I didn't think of this, did I? I'm like, just get my face, I don't need anything else, just my face, maybe a skein of yarn, my hands so I can gesture emphatically. So here we go. Can you see that? Yes, yeah you can. Okay, I'm just going to lean so I can see the viewfinder. There we go. So, it's a pretty simple, straightforward pattern. The front and the back are actually identical, the two pieces. Which I'd not seen before, and the necks are really wide. You can see it's a really wide neck compared to what I'm wearing at the moment. It's really wide. He's meowing at me. And then I have my lovely sleeves, of course they're in orange. The body's just in grey. I decided to play it fairly low-key. And if any of you guys saw me querying what colours to use for my shawl that I'm knitting by Josh Ricks, you'll see I also went for the slightly more low-key one there. That's a bit of a bloke thing, I think. Generally, when I've read about sort of knitting for men and stuff, they're always going about, oh, don't use massively bright colours, what have you. And of course, you know, I like me bright colours, I like me oranges and my greens and stuff. But I don't think I'm a massive fan of pinks or really kind of stellinery stuff, shiny metal stuff. I don't think I'm going to go for much of that. And when I was thinking about colour combos for this, I was like, yeah, a nice grey body and then highlight with the orange neck and sleeves. Yeah, love it. It's only in, it's in acrylic with 20% wool because I was like, I don't want to use up some of my fancy yarns that I bought at Woolfest when I'm making something that I'm not really sure how it's going to go, how it's going to turn out. I've never done the construction before. It's a learning process. So I went and bought some cheaper yarn. So this cost me something like a tenner. Sweet. Maybe even less, maybe like £8 in yarn to make a whole jumper. And it's lovely and it's soft, it's not scratchy. It smells teeny weeny bit woolly, but mostly not. And it fits quite loosely. I did a slightly wider one for me, and I think it's actually a little bit baggier than I intended it to be anyway. So it's quite a loose fit, but that's fine. I sort of treat it like a house jumper. So if I want to slob around in the house, I can just wear this. Yeah, so I will grab the book that it's from, because this is also a paid for pattern, as are the socks. The hat isn't. Did I tell you the pattern for that? I don't remember. I told you it last time, didn't I? But I grabbed all my patterns and stuff and brought them down here. So this one isn't paid for, so I can definitely show you. Ignore all my notes and what have you. So yeah, this is my hat is a socky, slouchy hat. Slouchy sock hat, I think it should be, but there we go. By Lauren Sanchez. I'm reading that back to front on the paper. Get me. It's really, really straightforward. So the jumper that I made is from Knits Men Want. It's quite cool, the book. Each of the patterns is kind of part of a chapter that talks about rules for knitting for men, basically. So there's a bit of blurb, only like a page or two, and then let's try and just get the picture in, so I'm not spoiling the book too much. There we go. More photos of the jumper, which is actually really useful because on this, and other people have had the same problem, working out how the shoulder construction into the neck works was a bit tricky for some people. The pattern seemed to give it a really long shoulder, or at least that's what a lot of comments made. Now when I went to make it, I kind of like was really cautious, like, oh, people said it's too long, so I erred on the side of caution. There was a bit of a confusion about the errata. The designer Bruce was on the Ravelry group for the book, I think, or the pattern, and also said it's the errata works one way, and the publisher's errata online had it going another way. So so I erred on the side of caution, made them slightly shorter. So that's also slightly why it's got a wide neck. Although in the pattern it's got quite a wide neck, so I think it's okay. Because it's only the front of it is right. That length isn't unknown. It's the length for the back that's unknown. Some people found it was way too long and almost like crossed over at the back. Yes, Rory, thank you. I don't want to have to sit next to an open door. So the book pictures are useful because I used them to decide how I was going to do the shoulder. That's how that started. This book in general, actually, a little bit of a book review whilst I'm talking about it. The patterns themselves, really nice. It's designed to be sort of quite manly knit, not in a masculine sense or macho sense rather, but more in the sort of masculine sense of not overly patterned, not overly detailed, chunkier rather than fine, that kind of thing, just so that even if you're knitting for knit appreciative guys, that they're kind of going to probably enjoy it still. So it's that kind of thing you'd see in a shop rather than a really fancy pattern, which is good when you're knitting for guys who maybe aren't quite so fancy. And from that point of view, it's great. I love the little bit of text, the stuff he's written and what have you. I really like his writing, his little hints and tips. He's got stuff about the yarns he's used, the gauges and stuff. So all that kind of stuff is useful. You can feel a but coming along, can't you? However, but the patterns themselves I find a little bit tricky. Once I translated it effectively, I was fine. Yes, as I mentioned, this pattern had some confusion around the collar. Basically because I think the direction for the right shoulder was different to the direction for the left. So obviously you just had to pick which one you were going to repeat rather than having one shoulder longer than the other. I'm not opening. You've got the other door. Go open the other door. I've got it all set up so the lighting's not too harsh. Which means I've got curtains draped across the doorway. So I'm not opening it. You just have to put up with a meowing cat. I'm sorry. But yes, so I had to translate it. One of the things was it says gauge 4, 4.5, 5, 5.5, 6. Which is great because he does the maths for how many yards and how many stitches and all of this you need for all these different gauges. Awesome, because it just makes life easier, right? If you buy a pattern, you want the work to have been done for you. That's the whole point. But gauge of 4. Can we get some units there, please? For what? But no, long story, not very short. It's stitches per inch. Yeah, so if the gauge was over 4 inches or 10 centimetres, what it normally is in my world, then 4 would be 16, up to 6, which would be 24. Because I can multiply by 4, my maths degree being put to good use there. Yes, I've let slip that I have a maths degree. Yeah, the not always 100% super clear in his patterns. I think sometimes there was a little bit of assumption as around, the knitter would know kind of deal. And certainly the errata weren't handled very well, 2 different messages. And just sort of some basicness. Like I checked all the front of the book, back of the book or anything to see if there were any notes about the gauges, and there isn't. So we've literally gone through, and I think for did I do it for every pattern, or did I just do it on the patterns I liked? But anyway, I've written in the book against all the gauges. Stitches per inch, because the chances are if I come back to this later, I'll have forgotten. Okay, so that's those 2 done. My fancy jumper that I made, and we'll probably end up making something like this again, but in fancier fabrics. But I may not make the exact same pattern again straight away because there's so many patterns that I want to make. and I have them in my queue, so if you're interested. The next one I want to make that's like an Aran jumper, so like a wintry jumper, is called Corridon. That's a paid for pattern, but I love the neckline, and I love the patterning and a couple of features. So when I get around to that, or if I decide that it's just needle adjacent enough for me to talk about it on here, then I will talk about that some more. However, segueing into needle adjacent projects, I showed you guys last time the yarn that I want to use for my jumper. So this is the jumper here. This is the Tobe pullover. I can't remember. It's a brand of American yarn that no longer exists that brought out the patterns for it. So it's a yarn brand pattern, and so obviously I'm doing all the substitutions and stuff. And I was like, right, I've done the hat, I'm on to the second sock, I think I can now cast on for this jumper. So I went and got the pattern and started reading it. Now, that really should tell you where this is going to go, right? I started reading the pattern just as I went to cast on. So yeah, I decided I liked the idea that someone else had of doing it in the round, because that just seemed easier. And I started to look through, I did it in the front and back and how far they are, that they're the same and all of this, and I was thinking, well, that makes it easier for me with knitting different yarns and wanting to have different yarns as I work up the body, then it makes sense to do it all in one. And then when I come to the sleeves, I'll have to do a bit of fancy mathematics, so my degree will come in helpful there. And actually all of that was fine. That was all fine. It was literally when I went to cast on, and it was like, right, using size 2 needles, I think it is. And I was like, oh, okay, what's a size 2 needle? A US 2 is, I think, 2mm. And I was like, okay, I've got some 2mm DPNs for socks. I'm trying to cast on a jumper here in the round. I'm not going to get a whole jumper in the round on sock DPNs. They're like 10 centimetres long. The stitches would be so cramped and they would be popping off the ends all the time. So obviously I've gone and bought more needles. So this is what I was using. This is my little measure your needles, measure your work and do your conversions tool. Very useful. So yes, the US 2 is a 2.75 and a US 4 is a 3.5 mil. But I did this pattern, I think, on 2.75s and 3.5s. And I checked the gauge because it's 4-ply in the round, so I figured that's about right for stockinette, so that'll be about right to check the gauge for the jumper. And it was a little bit looser than the jumper pattern wanted. I feel like I'm talking way too much about this, but never mind. So I decided to use smaller needles. So I've bought myself slightly smaller needles than the pattern calls for. That makes sense. I was suddenly looking at my notes and going, 3mm? I bought 3mm? Oh no! That's not even a US 3! But yeah, that's why. Because I worked out that if I went even smaller, but went up a size, then the stitch count and the gauge and everything would be right. I did some maths, and I convinced myself that this would be right. So I've bought much smaller needles than the pattern asks for, and I'm going to knit a size up. This, I think, will work, because that ratio seemed to be right to get me a good fit for a 40-inch jumper. I'm sort of a 36 waist, so I like a sort of a 40-inch jumper to give some slack. And I just measured this jumper, for example, and this is 40 across the chest. But it's and it's a knitted jumper, so there's a bit of stretch, but actually there's not a huge amount. So maybe 40 is a bit big, because I think 40 was what I tried to do to the one. But I'll do this one 40. And then if it is too baggy, well, it's an autumn sort of beach short sleeve jumper, so that's okay, and I'll learn for next time. But yeah, so I bought myself a 3mm circular fixed. No, 3mm, I bought the interchangeable needles. I made notes and everything, and I still can't get it right. Because that's the smallest on the Knit Pros that you can get the interchangeable needles for. and I love my interchangeable needles, and I'm tempted maybe in the future to try out things like cubics or carbons, because I've heard people talking about them and they really like them. But I'm really happy with my Novas, plain, just stained steel Novas. They treat me well, and I've got bamboos for when I've got really slippy yarns. And then I'm also getting a 2.25mm, which is a US 1 fixed, really long circular, so that I can get the whole jumper on it in the round and have lots of room. And I always figure, like, why not just get a longer circular, because you just have excess circular. So what? You just poke it outside. The only time I can think that it's worth having a shorter one is for something like a hat, because it's fiddly. You've not got that many stitches around, and it's fiddly constantly working the excess through the stitches as you go around, a bit sort of magic loop style. So I have like a short 24-inch, when you add the needles, cord for my interchangeables, which I can just do things like hat on, and that's fine. About 24 inches round is about good. That's all my finished objects and my needle adjacent projects done. So now I've just got 2 works in progress. So, you know, I don't think I'm taking too long. We'll see. So the first one I shall pick up, A, because it's the nearest, and B, because it is the second half. So basically it's the other sock. And here we are. Not particularly interesting at the moment. And the yarn again, look at that. Check out that yarn. And you can actually see the colour a lot better now that I've rewound it for the second half. Because the first time it was really very much the dark yarn that was overpowering, and I was really worried it was going to be massively the dark yarn, and it really isn't. Like, you get lots of the colours gradient, colour gradients in there, and you can just see, actually I forgot to say this earlier, you can just see, if I really point it out, where I didn't do an afterthought heel or anything, because I haven't done one of those before, and I just followed the pattern. I'm like, just follow the pattern until I've done one in pattern, and then I will try experimenting. So this is a short row heel, and you can see therefore where the colour gradient swapped slightly, but fortunately it was from the very dark brown to the slightly dark brown. So actually it's not that obvious, and of course if I'm wearing them in shoes you won't be able to tell at all, because you won't see much above that, sort of there-ish. So it's fine, absolutely fine. But yeah, I thought it would be mostly brown, and it's really not, and I've got my spare needle in my cake so I don't lose it. There's something else I'm going to say. Oh yeah, the other thing I've done, you'll notice this is starting, actually this is quite a good jumper to have when I'm doing a podcast, because it's white so I can hold yarn up against it and you can see the colour is a dark brown anyway. But it ends on a light, and that's because I said I was going to make a slightly longer sock. If I decide the longer sock is better, I'm going to go back, rip out the toe, knit on more, and then do the toe. So I wound off about 5 grams or something worth of yarn, so that it will take me to the dark brown. So that I can start my sock, my second sock, on dark brown as well. So hopefully there'll be some kind of matching, although they won't match exactly, which is fine. I don't like matching socks anyway. Case in point, sock number 1, sock number 2. Very similar, but did you spot the difference? That's also my orange. I have to have orange on somewhere, so I've got my orange hat and orange in the socks. Yeah, so and if that's not enough to do the toe as well, although I really think it will be, then I will use whatever scraps left over from the ball, because I don't think I will get to, well, I'm not sure. If I don't have any more dark to go off, or then I'll just use the scrap at the end right for the tip of the toe, and it'll be a colourful toe. I could even do like a contrasting or something, I don't know. I quite like the idea of doing a contrasting on this kind of yarn. So this is other stuff I've learnt actually that I meant to say. Gradiented yarn, which I guess is what this is. I'm still learning all of this. Where the colours actually blend into each other. You want to do something like an afterthought heel, I'm guessing, so that you don't get this. So that's a cool idea. And I quite like the idea of having contrasting heel and toe on something like this. You've got these lovely gradients and then pop, pop on here. I'm not going to change it. I'm really happy with these. But I may well make some again. And I've got others of this kind of yarn, so I can look at the gradient on that and decide if I want to try it for that. Whereas this, I don't think is gradient. Maybe it's variegated or self-striping. I haven't worked out what the difference between those two is. Back to the point, James, that the variegated yarns like this, it doesn't matter if you go off colour because it's constantly changing colour. And this one changes a lot quicker than that one. So I was kind of like, maybe a gradient on a hat would look quite nice and a variegated on the sock would look quite nice. But, you know, I'd already chosen. And actually I'm happy with how they both turned out. And I might swap next time anyway, just so that I can see. So yes, all of that was just because I'm showing you my cast on. So this was from my cast on party last night that I showed on Instagram. You know, two things. I've got my other cast on project over there just because I'd couldn't cast on the jumper, boo, but I'd finished the socks, I needed to cast on the sock, I'd finished everything else. I was like, I'm ready to cast on. Sweet. Finished the hat, finished one sock. I need to either cast on this sock or the jumper. I couldn't do the jumper, so I cast on instead, which is good actually, timing wise, because my deadline for this, if I want to get in on Josh's knit along, I think is the end of the month. That's Sword of a Knitter. If you check his podcast and then his Ravelry group and he's having a knit along, I think. I haven't double checked this. I'm still learning how to do the whole forum thing, and the knit alongs tend to be on the forums, and I've gone around following everybody and I've said hi to a few people, and I tend to bring up the Ravelry group whilst I'm watching the podcast, so a little hint for you there. You can now do that with mine. Go and get my Ravelry group up, and then if you want to leave comments as you're thinking about them, or write them down. And you can either save them all up to put in one big post when you've finished watching, whether you've quit sort of already, after half an hour or whatever, or you do the whole length of the podcast and you want to leave a long message, or you can just do it in little short bursts. And I think that's quite nice because then I can give feedback on the podcast directly. And I remember, whereas if I've watched a whole hour's podcast while knitting, I'm going to have forgotten the thing that I thought of. And I want to remember, I want to interact with you guys. So yeah, go grab my Ravelry group up and make notes and stuff during the podcast as you're knitting, or whatever you're doing, if you can, because I would love to know what you're thinking as I go along. So I'd saved a pattern of Josh's, and then he brought out his new one, 11th Hour, and I was like, oh, now this is my kind of knitting. Different textures, different weights of yarn in the same project. I'm like, yes, like that kind of thing really, really, really interests me. And I was like, I would love to work that all out and play with it. And he's done it for me. Thank you, Josh. So I was like, yep, yoink, bought that. And I may have also got a discount for watching Josh's podcast, so you should go and do that. And then buy his patterns and follow him, and you can see why this is turning into the I Love Josh podcast. And it's got colour work, and immediately, like, I've done a tiny amount, and already I'm learning about construction and techniques and all of this kind of stuff, and it's not hard. He's written everything out dead simply, dead straightforward. So I didn't even know I was doing it until afterwards. I was like, oh look, I'm doing all these different things. Rory, no, my knitting is not your toy. No. So yeah, it's the 11th hour, and it's really, really nice. And I was just amazed at how cool it looks already, whilst being still really straightforward. And I'm really, really excited. So thank you to everybody that helped me pick out the colours. I've cast on these two colours already, and I have a third one that's waiting to join in when the pattern calls for it. I went with the brown in the end. So just so you can see these. So these I've obviously caked up because I'm using them. and then I have the brown as well. So that's the colours I'm using. And finally, yes, this is the other thing I was going to say about this pattern, was it gave me a brain crush on Josh, because well-designed things bring me great joy. And this pattern has really clever construction.